I'm just going to go over our mussel program that we've been working on here at the North Platte Fish Hatchery since about 2014. So start off with a little overview of mussels, I guess. So right now, I guess what we're looking at is we have an obligation to protect and preserve all species for future generations. So that's why we're really looking into this program, making sure that we'll have mussels for future generations to work with in the future. And we also know that humans are probably the most likely cause for the severe decline in mussels. So if we had the impact, we also could probably figure a way to fix that. Mussels are important. They're food for different animals out there. They play an important role in the water ecosystems for nutrient cycling, and they also clean our water for us. So they're pretty important all around, and we probably want them in our waterways. North America is home to an extremely diverse number of species, very threatened group of animals. There's 38 that have already been thought to be extinct, and 77 of those are critically endangered. I've also seen a stat that around 70% possibly are also just threatened. So they're a very threatened group of organisms in all their drainages. Human impacts that have caused most of their issues, siltation, pollution, fragmentation. These are probable causes for the declines. Bank erosion, some past practices of waste disposal, runoff, and dams and channelization have definitely degraded their habitat, which has most likely caused the elimination of a lot of the host fish that these animals need to complete their life cycle. So this is the life cycle of the Plain Pocketbook. That's pretty much all we've been working with is Lampacillus. So they actually use a lure to get a fish to come in and bite them. Let's see if I get my cursor here. You can see them in between here. There's actually their gill. It's called a marsupial gill. So they actually create a lure with their mantle. What they're trying to do is have a fish come and bite that. And when they bite that, the tubules inside the gill will actually burst into the fish's mouth. As the fish breathes, they actually clamp down on the gill, become encapsulated on the gill, and then using that little bit of nutrition that they have enclosed in their shell, they complete their life cycle and transform into juvenile mussels. So there's 30 species of mussels historically found in Nebraska waters. 8 of them were always pretty rare, so we're not really looking at them a whole lot. There's 13 of them that are doing pretty well. Most of the ones that are doing pretty well are actually found in our reservoirs. And actually some of them are not doing well in other places. Freshwater drums are pretty common host fish for a lot of them. And we actually have a lot of them in our waterways where they're not as prevalent in other locations. We actually have done a lot of work with other agencies shipping drum to them so that they can inoculate their fish with the mussel that they're looking to raise. So through that, we've come up with 9 candidates for reintroduction or augmentation. So these are the mussels, list of mussels that we're looking at. The first one is Plain Pocketbook. That's the one we started with in 2014. We only know of one population in the Elkhorn River that we actually can collect brood from. They used to be pretty widespread throughout the state. Don't really know when their total decline occurred, but we know through historical records that we used to have a lot more than we have now. Fat mucket is something we started working with about 2-3 years ago. 1 specimen was collected, probably around 2000, I believe it was, in the Big Blue River. So that one also used to be fairly widespread. Now we're not seeing it show up pretty much anywhere. Yellow sand shell, same thing. It's found in 3 rivers, never very common. According to our previous stream biologists, that this mussel will probably have no brood sources in the state. So these are the Lampacillus that we were looking at. They have a common life history. That's why we chose them to work with. They're long-term brooders, so they hold on to Glaucidia for a longer period of time. They won't abort as easy if they're handled. So they're just some we started with that are a little easier. They used to be widespread throughout the state. Now they're had severe population crashes, so they're a good candidate to start with. Pond mussel shows on there. 1 specimen, possibly some in the Big Blue. 1 specimen found in the Elkhorn. Black sand shell, 1 specimen also, and the Wabash picto probably no longer found in the state at all. Black sand shell is something we tried working with a little bit last year. We were unsuccessful in our production. We actually had a gravid female shipped from Wisconsin to us that we inoculated some walleye with, but we did not find any transformers when we drained the pond. So that's a species that we have a brood source available to us that we're going to continue to try working with. That's along with the yellow sand shell, probably the next couple that we'll try out after the fat mucket and plain pocketbook. Pimpleback, several drainages in eastern Nebraska. We have not had much luck identifying any of these. There is some historical record showing that they have many drainages that they are found in, but we have not found them. They look a lot like a different species that's fairly common, the maple leaf. So there's some issues with identification and stuff like that with that one. The creeper, we thought we had a really good source for them, but recently found out that those are not creepers, they're cylindrical paper shells. But just last week, we happened to find some on the North Loop River that were positively identified as the creeper. So we will have hopefully a brood source for them now. And the pistol grip, one was found in the Big Blue River, same time, around 2000, I believe. And that is also a species that we're looking into working with. We have some contacts down in Kansas that they feel may be able to find some brood sources for us, but no promises. So this is an interesting graph that Nathan Eckert gave to us. It just gives me an idea of where we're looking to find our mussels from. Number one, so that's the pattern is number one, you start in the actual stream, you'll collect your brood from there, reintroduce or augment into that stream. Two, you find the tributaries, then you try to collect the brood out of there and then put them into the stocking site, which would be number one. Three would be adjacent drainages, and four is just anywhere. So the problem, as you see from previous slides, is we're probably looking more at 3 and 4 for pretty much all of our threatened mussels in Nebraska. Here, make sure I got everything I want to talk to there. So that's another important thing, like I talked about a little bit there, is we are utilizing other agencies. We have contacts in Kansas and Iowa that have helped us collect some brood in the past. So federal agencies, we have some contacts with Genoa, and we're also looking into working with Gavin's Point National Fish Hatchery. They hopefully will be able to get onto like the James River and different tributaries of Missouri and South Dakota that have historical data showing that a lot of the brood mussels that we will want to use in the future are located there or have been in the past. So there's a couple of pictures of the current species we're working with. On the left is the plain pocketbook, on the right is fat mucket. Probably should have got some pictures of their beak structure. I guess they do look fairly similar. The different beak structure is usually what you use to identify mussels, so that's probably why I should have got that, I guess. Didn't think about that, sorry. Okay, so I'll go over the inoculation process that we use here at North Platte Fish Hatchery. It's just a 4-step process, I guess. So we start off with our extraction process. What we're doing here is we're trying to be the host fish. We're taking a needle, injecting water into those gills, and expelling the Glaucidia into a dish. So all we do is pretty much pry it open. We don't really have a set amount of fluid that we use or anything like that. We just visually inspect the mussels every time we use a syringe. There's still some in there. We go in and try to get the rest of them out. So it's kind of a bad picture. What we actually do now is we come in laterally through the gill and then pull it out, so we don't have as many injection sites. So we'll actually insert the needle and inject the water and slightly pull back as we're injecting. We've had a lot better luck with that and probably a lot easier on the mussel. Okay, so the next thing we do is check the viability of the Glaucidia. So this is the Glaucidia after we extract them out of the mussel. So what we're going to do is we're going to take salt water and add it to the petri dish here, and as they come in contact with the salt water, they have a reaction which tells us that they are going to be a viable Glaucidia for encapsulation. It takes a second to get going here. So we used to do viability percentage. We never really had any issues with the viability of our Glaucidia. It's always been above 75%. I used to have a chart, but like I said, it's always been good. We never had any issues with that. So we check it every time just to make sure, but it's not something we keep track of anymore. So now that we know we have good Glaucidia, we'll start the enumeration process. So we're doing on the top left there is we're just aerating a known volume of water with Glaucidia in it. Then we'll take a sample out of that, usually like 50 microns, and then we'll count all of the Glaucidia in there, then extrapolate that over the known volume that we have in the top left picture, and then we'll be able to get an approximation fairly good on the number of Glaucidia that we expelled out of that mussel. And then we use that for our infestation. So we'll take we'll have a known number of Glaucidia per milliliter, and then we'll take that and figure out how many that is for about 6,000, depending on the size of the fish. It varies a little bit. We don't really have an exact number. It's kind of made it up through different contexts that we had. We'll place them. We actually use a cooler, you can see, and then we'll aerate it very vigorously, add in Glaucidia, give them 15 minutes, let them get attached to the gill. Then on the right there, you see we'll inspect the fish to make sure we're getting good attachment. And then we'll kind of have an idea how, if we want to take them out, leave them in longer, or if we need to add some more Glaucidia to the batch. All right, so when we started off, we created a project objective. The goal was to create at least 3 plain pocket populations in 3 different river basins, and then establish 1 fat bucket population, and monitor and then after we establish those populations, to monitor them for success or failure. Our idea of success is eventually to have natural recruitment. So that's something we have noticed in the study, is we do have some gravid females. So hopefully the next step will be finding some juvenile mussels. And the last thing was to build an aquatic species conservation building. Oops. Okay, so just touch on these subjects of what we've done. Start with propagation, then we'll move on to stocking, and then talk a little bit about the conservation building that we built. So like I said, we started in 2014. We received 3 brood mussels from the Genoa National Fish Hatchery, and we inoculated some hatchery-reared largemouth bass. So on the bottom right, you can see the cages that we built. We had a little misunderstanding of how those cages were supposed to operate. We thought that the newly transformed juveniles would fall off onto the bottom of the cage and sit there, grow, and then when we drain the pond, they'd be there waiting for us, which unfortunately did not happen. They, of course, fell off the cage onto the pond bottom, and we didn't happen to look till a couple days later. And you can see from those pictures, they didn't look very good by the time we found them. So we only collected 17 mussels for that's not supposed to be fall of 2019. Sorry, that's supposed to be 2014. So after 2014, you see we got a lot more successful in our productivity. Yeah, so this year we did not raise any mussels. I said we tried with the black sand shell, but with the COVID and everything going around, we weren't sure what we were going to get accomplished, so we tried to avoid it a little bit this year. But you can see last year was very successful. Our numbers have pretty much been going up every year, and we think we're getting a better understanding of what we're doing and how to raise these guys. So that's just a picture of 2019. You can see all the little mussels down there. So what we've been trying to do now is we put these cages into our catfish ponds. So our catfish are fed a dry diet daily. So what we're doing is we're actually fertilizing these ponds daily, creating a nutrient load for these mussels to grow the bacteria and the phytoplankton and everything that these mussels are going to feed on. And we also try to keep them in the deeper part of the pond. We don't really have a lot of data to back that up, but for some reason we're also getting a lot better production if we keep them down in the deeper end of the pond. One theory is that we actually have our water inflow there, which is consistent in those ponds. So they're getting a little more fresh water, maybe not getting some ammonia or toxicity buildups there. So that's something that maybe in time we'll actually have a little more in-depth look at. This is another picture here of the pocketbook before we go and pick them all up. Tagging. So every mussel that we have on site, we tag with at least a glue dot The reason we do that is to make sure that when we do actually get some natural recruitment, we know the difference between a hatchery reared mussel and a natural recruited mussel. So at the top left, we have a pit tag. The interesting thing, like to get on the stocking a little bit here, but most of the mussels that we're stocking are in flowing sand, which makes them extremely difficult to locate. So those pit tags are helping us somewhat. When we get flood events, they seem to disappear. Our reader only goes 18 inches deep, I believe, and we have gone to streams 1 week, not found anything, come back the next week and found them all. Usually after a major water event, they seem to bury, so not necessarily the benefit to us the last couple of years. So this is what we got for this year. This is I guess, artificial stream that we've created. This is just to hold them for a short period of time, and these mussels are going to be tagged throughout the winter. Hopefully we're going to hire somebody to help us with that. I think that's in the process. So there's about 12 to 16,000 mussels in those two troughs. Just another view of it. You can see they're pretty tight, but we're running like 30, 40 gallons a minute. Oxygen is not an issue, and the exchanges are pretty substantial. So hopefully they won't have any issues with that. So this is a pretty poor picture, but this is what, so there's a stake here holding down mussel baskets. We put 4 mussel baskets out in each one of those stakes. That's how we raise them for our second year and overwinter them. So that's just a picture of the basket that we use on the right. We'll actually put sediment in there to hold the mussels, to give them a little more space, be able to move up vertically in the sediment. Okay, so here's some of the historical locations I was telling you about before. The Plain Pocketbook on the left and the Fat Mucket on the right. You can see most of our good mussel habitat from historical data is actually down in the southeast corner. They have found mussels throughout, but like I said, with our flowing sand, we have some issues maybe with our surveys, just because when you have the flowing sand, when a mussel dies, it's not necessarily easy to find that shell later on. We're down in the southeast, you have more rocky substrate, and they flow up onto islands that are created or sit on top of the rocks. A lot easier to find those shells. And like I said, also the mussels seem to bury very deep in the sand, so also not very conducive to surveys. So this is our 2019 stockings to date, focusing, Elkhorn River, Big Blue, Nemaha down in the southeast. Med Creek and Red Willow are something that they're close to us, so that helps, but there is some historical data, especially in Medicine Creek, of finding some mussels there, and we've seen probably the most diverse amount of species that we've surveyed in Medicine Creek, and the mussels are doing very well there. Then the new basins that we're looking to add are in the upper North Loop and the Niobrara Basin. So 2020, so this is our previous stockings, totals there. Not a whole lot to talk about on that, just an idea of what we stocked in up till last year. I guess a lot of people have been talking about flood events. That's also probably why our stockings don't go up very quickly. Southeast has been a major issue the last couple of years with the flood events that we've had down there, so that's limited our ability to get in there. So you can see in 2020, we've pretty much doubled our stocking rates from the previous 5 years. A lot of that has to do, of course, with the flood events that we've been having, and this year we were able to actually get out into the rivers and do some stockings. So we're up to 16 individual sites now. That's a big thing we're looking at, is we want to have long-term access to these sites. We have had an issue the first couple of years of losing some access to some private ground, so that's something we'd still work with, but we're trying to stay away from. We've worked a little bit with the feds, especially at like the Homestead Monument down there, south of Beatrice, or north of Beatrice, I believe. We've worked with, of course, our WMAs, SRAs, and another place that we've actually tried utilizing a lot is some of our golf courses here in the state, because a lot of them do have streams that run through them, and hopefully that opens up long-term access. All of them have been very helpful so far to this point, so hopefully we can utilize some more of those in the future. Sorry, this map is a little small. Those little exclamation points are the new stockings that the total stockings, I guess, now, so there's some new points added on there. We've actually been stocking Plain Pocketbook and Fat Mucket into pretty much all the same streams. Not sure if that's the correct way to go, but we've only got so many sites and so many different habitats, and we're pretty capable of telling them apart, so that's not an issue. And it seems historically they definitely did share the same ranges. So. All right, and there's our total stockings to date now. Hopefully, as you saw, that 2019 was a banner year for us, so that as long as we can get our mussels tagged out in the water, we should actually be doubling at least these numbers, or actually tripling them from all previous stockings. You can see on the right, that's just our rig that we use to go and stock them. We do put them in our fish hauling tanks to keep them on oxygen. It's pretty handy to use. And here's our conservation building. So this was part of our grant that we got to create a building that will allow us to do our inoculation processes, hold our fish species, and also to propagate some of our fish species. We've moved away from a lot of our intensive culture on our mussel production. We're really having a lot better luck out in our ponds with growth, numbers wise. It's a lot less labor intensive other than the picking them up. So this is pretty much our setup we usually have out there. A lot of those are recirculating aquatic systems. So we can raise our fish in there. We can hold our bass in there, any of our fish species that we're using for our host. We can keep a consistent water temperature is something that we've really looked at. It's something we use in the fish culture world is we call it temperature units. So our temperature units is our 1 degree above 32 degrees. And so then you multiply that over the time that you're going to hold those mussels on the fish species. And that gives us an idea of how long we actually need to hold them inside before we move them out in the cages. So I guess the objectives have been met so far. The Plain Pocketbook, we did create the 3 different over my time. I haven't heard from anybody.
You're a little bit over, but you're the last speaker, so.
Okay.
There's still time for a few.
I said I hadn't heard from anybody, and I was like, oh.
More questions than less. If you want to answer less questions, keep talking. If you want to answer more questions, stop.
I'm just about done. So,
okay.
So we did create our 3 different populations of Pocketbook. We did create the 1 fat mucket. As you see, we have 16 different sites, so we covered that, and we got our aquatic species building built. So those are actually objectives off of our grant, so that we got to thank our funding sources. NET is what got us started. I believe the legacy knows a little bit about that, I hope. And then we had some of our staff that were able to write us some grants. We got a state wildlife grant that we shared with Iowa. Ended up being about $500,000 with the state side paying a little under 200. So that's helped us get to this point. We still have a little bit of money left, so we're looking at some different things, but that is how we got to this point. So I'd like to thank everybody that's been a part of this to this point, and hopefully we continue working with them.
Awesome.